Right, as everyone knows, recording in progress because you just heard it. All right, so thank you everyone for joining us today. I am so excited for you to meet Stacy and hear her presentation about communication. It was a great presentation. I've had an opportunity to listen to it already, so I'm very excited to hear it once again. As I mentioned, of course, we're going to be recording this. For those that need CPE, there's not going to be any questionnaires or anything, but if you need that CPE, I'll probably communicate out a list of everyone that attended. But otherwise, again, thank you so much for joining us. We will have another event later on in August, just to kind of prep for that. It's the last Thursday of August. I think it's the 28th. So just keep that in mind. And of course, I'll remind everyone about that as well. But thank you so much, Stacy, again for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you if you want to introduce yourself briefly and kick us off.
Yeah, hi everyone. As you know, my name is Stacy. I'm a senior solutions consultant now. I have transitioned jobs. I'm now at Immersive, formerly known as Immersive Labs. Um, but I just wanted to thank you all for coming today, first and foremost. This presentation is probably going to be a little bit different from ones that you've seen before, if you haven't already seen it. Um, so get ready for that. And I like to call out that for anything that I originally made in this or concept that I made, I put a little star in the corner. So if you like my art, please let me know too. I have it dispersed throughout. There's a couple of slides that didn't make it in the transition from PowerPoint to Google Slides, but there's still a lot of great stuff to look at. And here's a question for you. Who here would consider them a cat person? Like if you're a cat person, raise your hand. You can say something in the chat. All right. What about dog people? Anyone? I also like dogs, right? And maybe you're a little bit of both. Maybe you're split somewhere down the middle. Whether you have cats or dogs, and having animals gives us a really special relationship with those animals that we keep in our homes. We know what their expressions mean more often than not because we spend so much time around them. And cats in particular, they communicate not just through sound, but through body language, eye movements, and tail flicks. Their posture can indicate anything from relaxation to aggression, with an arched back signifying defensiveness and fear. The position of a cat's ears and whiskers also play a crucial role in conveying their emotions. Ears flat against the head might signal irritation, while if they're upright, it could indicate that they're curious or alert. Eye contact and blinking are also significant. Slow blinks, often referred to as cat kisses, are a sign of trust and affection. If you have a cat, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And what's more, cats, inclusive of their unique traits and interesting body language, also have held rich and varied symbolic meaning across different cultures and historical periods. In ancient Egypt, for example, they were revered and associated with the goddess Bastet, symbolizing protection, fertility, and motherhood. In many cultures, cats are seen as like mysterious and independent, and they're often linked with supernatural or the mystical. For example, in folklore, they're sometimes considered guardians of the underworld or spirits that can cross between worlds. Black cats in particular, I have one somewhere around here. One of my cats is actually sleeping behind me. They do have dual symbolism. In some traditions, they're considered omens or bad luck, and they're associated with witches. While in others, like in Japanese culture, they're actually seen as symbols of good fortune. Cats are also symbols of agility, stealth, curiosity, and their graceful movements and inquisitive nature have captivated us for a very long time. They're often also seen as enigmatic creatures that embody both positive and negative traits, depending on the cultural context, as I'm sure you can tell. Speaking of black cats, one expression I didn't include so far is one that is one of my favorites. I like to call it big eyes. So this is a real world example of my cat that's, like I said, roaming around here somewhere with his big, wide, loving yet mischievous eyes. Either he's going to cuddle me in this moment or he's probably going to attack my foot. In this particular picture, he was sitting on my lap while looking up at me as I was working. And as I said, this could be indicative of a couple of different things, and it could be contingent on the circumstance. And did you know more cat facts? You're like, what did I sign up for? Cats have honed their meows to communicate with us and to manipulate humans. That's right, manipulate us. Each sound, tone, and pitch is carefully curated to elicit a desired response. Recently, I started feeding the cats like this newer food and these newer types of treats, little churro things, and they are just mad about it. They go absolutely bananas. And they do meow for that. That's definitely a signal to say, I want more. But funnily enough, most of their communication with us isn't actually that goal oriented. In fact, most of it could be more like affiliative signaling, and that refers to behaviors or signals that indicate a desire to form, maintain, or strengthen social bonds and relationships. It's kind of like when you're standing in line and someone's like, "Sup," and you kind of nod back at them. That's a type of affiliated signaling. And they often promote cooperation, trust, and group cohesion. These can be nonverbal cues, verbal cues, social behaviors, forming group identities, and even can reflect how we offer our help, support, acknowledge contributions, and form a consensus among other people. All right, I get it. Why are we talking about cats? I thought I was coming here to learn about communication, not for you to talk about cats. First of all, cats are great, so jot that down. So, secondly, I have a point. Just as cats have their unique ways of communication, so do we. This presentation is not actually about cats. The first part of it kind of is, but we as humans communicate in both obvious and subtle ways, much in how we communicate with our own pets. We do similar things with each other. So if we're piecing this all together, what I'm bringing attention to is a more granular focus. This discussion thus far has been about how they communicate with us, but keep in mind, we have to think about how we communicate back to them and relate those signals and like ascribe value to them or ascribe meaning and description. Additionally, within different pockets of society, we've attached meanings to cats based on their overall demeanor, behaviors, and so on to create symbolism surrounding them. That's what I was getting at before too. And since they can't write or talk yet, we have to pay far more attention to their expressions. We tend to index different things about them and we decode the messages they're giving us. Part of effective communication is understanding nuance, detail, emotion, expression, intent, and the impact of body language, as well as being able to explain things in relatable ways with devices, symbols, and other concepts to help resonate with audience. Maybe like cats, for example. It's kind of getting a little meta here, huh? And the way I see it, if we can learn to understand animals without spoken language, we can also learn to understand other humans on a deeper level too. Now, the question being, what really can we learn from cats? What do we think the most important part of this following trifecta is? Words, tone, or body language? If anyone knows, you can raise your hand, you can say it out loud. Give you,
Anybody? Come on.
it's okay. You don't have to, but
Shy group. Go ahead.
all right. So the one that you might not know is there is a rule called the 73855 rule that suggests 7% of our meaning is actually communicated through spoken word. 38% is tone of voice, while 55% is body language. Me being on camera right now, you seeing how I'm moving, you can tell that I'm in more of an upbeat attitude. I'm presenting. So that is a huge, huge component of how people interpret communication. This concept was developed by a psychology professor by the name of Albert Mehebrain at the University of California in 1971. And would you have guessed that to be the case? I didn't think that originally. Most of us might think that it's just words, right? That words carry the most meaning. And as we're formulating these questions, the next question might be, why are you qualified to talk about this? And here's another esoteric. You knew it was going to get this way. You knew there was going to be deeper meaning. This is where someone might usually put their credentials. I told you where I worked. I've been in information security for quite a while, and I do have credentials and experience, education, interest, and skills in the topic of communication. But instead of telling you who I am, I'd rather just do a form of show and tell and keep you at the edge of your seat. I'm not going to have a formal about me section because throughout this, you should be able to get an idea of my approach to communication, aspects about me, my values, and some of my thought processes, which I think is better than just giving you a list of jobs that I've had or things that I've done. And what I will say is, whenever it comes down to it, I do work in a lot of technical roles. And one of the biggest things that you'll find in this presentation is that I like to really focus on the communication and people factor whenever it comes to roles and technology. So that said, let's break it down and talk about some types of communication. Maybe you've seen all this before, maybe you'll learn something new. I hope the latter. But from our first cave paintings to carrier pigeons to the printing press, from the first radio signal to the first time someone answered a telephone, even to our first instance of a hello world, communication has been in a constant state of evolution. Every new medium has expanded the way we connect, share, and understand one another. As we move from ancient methods of storytelling to digital realms of mass media and instant messaging, the essence of communication, which is bridging the gap between individuals, remains unchanged. Even if the methods have become more sophisticated, each leap in communication and subsequently leaps in technology to make it happen is more than just an upgrade in tools. It's a transformation in how we interact with the world. We can break barriers of distance and time and increasingly making the globe a more connected place. I don't know about the rest of you, but I remember when I was younger and I'd watch the Jetsons, and the idea of like doing what we're doing right now and having a video conversation was just like but it happens. It's happening now. And because of this and how things are now, communication is diverse and it's a far-reaching phenomenon that extends well just beyond spoken language and written words. We convey messages and information through countless mediums, many of which people might not initially recognize as communication. Beyond speaking in person or over the phone, as I said, our facial expressions, our body language, and even fashion choices do send powerful signals about how we feel and who we are. Art forms like stories, poems, or even like interpretive dance communicate emotions and ideas, while physical touch can even express care or solidarity in ways that words cannot. When telling stories, we choose specific words, we designate a type of message that we do want to convey, and maybe a dramatic situation to unravel as the story progresses. Did you know there are only 7 types of stories, 36 different kinds of dramatic situations, but millions upon millions and millions of ways to tell those stories? The possibilities are virtually endless with some of those combinations. And with all this room to soar, how do we best encapsulate our ideas and how do we do our best to resonate with others? Before I move a little bit further, I mentioned giving clues about me. Well, here's your first clue. It's neurodivergence. And if you don't know what that is, it's a difference in neurological function and what is considered typical or normal. This is usually used to describe autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, and other such conditions. And neurodivergent individuals can often experience a heightened awareness of communication nuances, which can prove to be both an advantage and a disadvantage. And a handful might be thinking, wait a minute, I thought people with neurodivergent qualities struggle in social situations. And some do and some don't. That can be true, just like any other person. It's a higher frequency in people who are neurodivergent. The experience can be highly individualized. Sufficient to say, more studies are coming out that suggest certain subsets of neurodivergent people are actually more aware in social situations than people who are neurotypical. I read this article from New Glade Counseling, and it states, quote, in response to the challenges of misunderstanding and self-blame, the neurodivergent brain becomes hypervigilant. Every interaction is carefully scrutinized to prevent mistakes and navigate the intricacies of social dynamics. We desperately want to get things right this time, so we become hyper-aware in every situation, end quote. And yeah, for myself, I would say that that's true. Hyper awareness can lead to a heightened sensitivity in nonverbal cues, tone, body language, word choice, all these things that, making some neurodivergent individuals particularly adept at understanding subtle emotional undercurrents that others might happen to overlook. And however, here's the thing though, it does come at a cost. It can be overwhelming. With the constant mental filtering and decoding of social cues, you can get a little bit anxious. Maybe you'll have some emotional exhaustion, overstimulation. You can even get a little burnt out by it if it happens too much. And this is kind of a paradox. Being highly attuned to social signals, yet struggling with the weight of interpreting them, does illustrate a complex nature of neurodivergence in social interactions. And I myself, I'm someone that, as you can tell, maybe I'm in tune with social interactions, but I have a very, very low social battery. You bet your bottom dollar I'm going to be sleeping good tonight after presenting and doing things throughout the day. And I always like to bring this up too. Let's talk about a very foundational psychological hierarchy. So, and some of it's a little cut off. Like I said, I did a transition between PowerPoint and Google Slides, so I apologize. But a point that I like to make here is when it boils down to it, we're mammals. We have basic needs. And it's often that we talk about the needs of someone in context of social engineering and insider threat, working in information security, but not necessarily in how we engage with one another or how that may affect one's abilities to communicate and perform, like whenever it comes to their work. And in the realm of insider threat, some of the most notable aspects of detecting it are synonymous with things like frequent job dissatisfaction, withdrawal, isolation, stressful life events, sudden behavioral changes, unexplained absences, the list goes on. But what if this is because someone is lacking the basic psychological safety and belonging needs necessary to perform at higher levels? What if we tend to those needs before things go awry and people get desperate? According to the concept, human needs were arranged in a hierarchy like you see here, with the physiological needs at the bottom, those are things needed for survival, and the more creative and intellectually oriented self-actualization needs up at the top. Maslow adopted this model and argued that survival needs must be satisfied before the individual can accomplish the higher needs. So if you're feeling down, if you don't have like the things that you need, food, shelter, water, you're not going to be operating at any higher level. You're going to be scraping by. And the higher up the hierarchy, obviously, the more difficult it does become to satisfy the needs associated with that stage because of the interpersonal and environmental barriers that inevitably hold us down and frustrate us. I bring this up because over the past handful of years, especially whenever we include things like pandemics happening, I've seen this stuff get completely ignored. I've seen people deal with sickness or other things, and they're still expected to operate at the level that they always were. And that's not how things should be. That's just going to ruin people. And so I'm going to switch gears and we're going to talk about applicability because we're all here kind of under the context of information security. So we all know people, process, and technology. It's a core tenet of InfoSec. It serves as a three-legged stool, or like you could think of it as a set of gears. When you take away one aspect, everything else kind of falls apart. As I mentioned, the people part, especially communication, is often overlooked. Effective communication is essential to align teams, manage security risks, and respond swiftly to incidents. Without clear, consistent, and well-structured communication, even the best technology and processes can't compensate for those misunderstandings or a lack of awareness. In fact, many breaches and security lapses are often traced back to a type of miscommunication or inadequate human involvement in implementing security policies and procedures. And here's kind of the thesis of this whole talk. So, if you ask me, communication is both a soft skill and a hard skill. Dare I say it, even a technical skill. Consider the definition of soft skills. This refers to a set of personal attributes, behaviors, and social attitudes that enable individuals to interact effectively with others in a workplace. Whereas hard skills are generally defined as technical abilities and knowledge you gain through training, practice, and education. Is communication not something that we can train, practice, and learn more about? Yes, it is. In the world of information security, we tend to think of this communication as a soft skill, unless, of course, we're referring to social engineering, and then it's more of a technical skill, or, conveying the quantification of risk, and then that's more of a technical skill, right? Or explaining technical vulnerabilities to non-technical shareholders, or communicating measurements and metrics surrounding data analysis and reporting. I think I'm making my point clear. These are all methods of communication that kind of have their own notch off to the side where we don't consider them to be either or, but they still kind of fall under the realm of being technical. And I work across a lot of different organizations and see a pretty consistent trend. There's a lot of this idea of technical people falling upward, and they get into people management and leadership roles, and often whenever they don't want to, and that happens quite a bit from what I've seen. And a part of that trend is the people ending up in these roles, they tend to have very little in the ways of leadership training, and they often aren't the best at communicating with their peers. This kind of structure can create strain on others and even lend to a toxic environment at its extremes. And I'll get more into that part here in just a bit. And earlier, when I was bringing up neurodivergence, I did that because, you have to consider different types of ways people are comprised, different neurotypes, if you will. People who have different neurotypes, they're going to view the world and interpret information from a lens that's unlike your own. And historically, many have viewed the traditionally technical person as inherently lacking in social skills. The truth of the matter is, you can be both. You absolutely can. And how we've generally viewed the ability to communicate in terms of overall success, it might be a bit flawed. To define this in more detail, I'm getting into this phenomenon because this is something that I do and it works most of the time, but not all the time. There's this concept called engineer's disease, which refers to the tendency amongst engineers and other technical professionals to assume that their technical knowledge equips them with the capability to solve complex problems outside of their domain of expertise. And this phenomenon often results in overconfidence when addressing non-technical or interdisciplinary challenges, leading to flawed, overly simplistic, or inappropriately technical solutions. So an example of this could be, just speaking from experience, if you have an issue with people looking at, I don't know, social media at work, and then they put a technical solution in place to block it, but then they look at it on their phones, you're not solving the problem, right? Like this could have just been a conversation. And this term does critique the habit of focusing on logic and technical systems without fully considering human factors or the complexities inherent in other fields. It's also sometimes called solutionism. And this is where technical solutions are applied to problems that require a deeper understanding of social or human dynamics. And as an engineer, now consultant, I do suffer from engineer's disease, but I like to think about it in a different way. Whereas I do use the same or similar processes in solving problems across the board, I shift my variables and understanding to align with the problem at hand instead of just focusing on the technical part. And I like to call that human troubleshooting. And arguably, this, in my own headcanon, is a fancy word for understanding how psychology, sociology, background, cultural context, perspective, and emotional intelligence intersect with people-based problem solving. It's about recognizing that behind every failure of communication, there are human behaviors, biases, and social dynamics that shape what we do, what we say, and how we say it. And these factors are often invisible. They can deeply influence the way information is conveyed, interpreted, and responded to, requiring us to not only understand what is being said, but also the underlying emotional and cultural context driving the conversation. This includes steps like having and showing a semblance of self-awareness, understanding and checking your own biases, and being in tune with things like intersectionality. A huge, huge, huge part of human troubleshooting, or any type of troubleshooting, is active listening. A lot of us here were technical and we like to fix things. Fixing things requires active listening when dealing with other humans, 100% without a doubt. And depending on the context, is fixing things even necessary? Sometimes we do have to turn off that solutioning part of our brains. As an anecdote, my best friend and I, when we discuss and talk about problems, will openly express whether or not we want advice versus just wanting to vent. This is because of me. I would usually jump to giving advice until one day she finally just said, "Hey, can I just vent for a change?" And I was just, "Oh, yeah, no, sure, go ahead." And now we preface our conversations with that. I'm not looking for advice, I just want to vent, and vice versa. And what we all need to collectively do as not only speakers in conversations, but also as participants and listeners is to actually listen to what is being conveyed. Don't be sitting around with what you want to say, repeating in your head to where you don't hear them. You're not going to catch what they're saying. Plus, when listening, we need to be aware of our posture, body language, and facial expressions. So if someone's telling you a story and you're like, ugh, the entire time, it's probably not going to land well. It helps to ask questions and even repeat information back to the person so you can ensure that you did hear them correctly. If someone is expressing a problem or something personal, try to show them empathy. Don't be too judgmental and wait to have the facts before you jump to a conclusion. It's another thing that I do. I say these things because I'm trying to give advice to not just jump to the whatever it is that you think it might be when it might not be. And continuously evaluate the conversation based on what is being said, the questions you've asked, and any context clues that you're picking up on.
Let's see, I have to ask because I am terrible at active listening. I want to be. I want to be better at it, but I have struggled with that forever because again, I'm one of those that has, yeah, okay, yeah, it's in my head. This is how I'm going to respond. This is what I'm going to do. What How do you help people who are terrible at active listening? Like what you'd already mentioned a couple of things. I've tried those. You have anything beyond that, like advanced troubleshooting level kind of stuff you could do for active listening?
I can tell you what I do. If I start to think of something, because I have a lot of people have like an internal voice, right? Like you might be thinking it's repeating in your head. You just tell yourself, stop, wait, listen, and like try to get it to clear out. And then you tell yourself you'll have your turn. Don't worry, keep listening. Because I even, starting this new job, I get excited, and when someone says something, and I find myself interrupting, so I just have to remind myself that whenever it's communication, there has to be that back and forth. It can't always just be you talking. So I don't know if that is necessarily good advice, but those are the things that I try to deploy. And I try to almost repeat their words as they're saying them in my head. That way I'm forcing myself to listen and transcribe, as opposed to like having those two, like my thoughts and that butt heads.
Yeah, that's fair. And like I said, I have been told this specifically by my wife many, many times, especially the idea of jumping in and trying to fix something instead of listening. So I
Hmm.
just now go with the fact that she just needs to vent, period. But either way, I like the idea of communicating that up front. This is venting. I'm looking for a
Yes.
solution or whatever. That's great. But thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, in that case, definitely just try to. And so like I'm an artist, and whenever I like interpret what people are saying, sometimes I'll create visualizations around it too. Like, as if you could think of it like if my mind's eye was a like a movie screen or like a monitor, there's images happening, and then there's almost like closed captioning of what they're saying at the bottom, and that's how I try to like keep myself focused.
That's great. I love that.
So we talked about listening. Great question, by the way. Thank you. And now we can talk about talking. And speaking tactfully requires a deliberate combination of clarity, structure, emotional intelligence, and expertise. Again, very technical. To communicate clearly, it's essential to understand your audience, and whether it's a single person, a team, a group of people listening to you present, and tailor your message to their knowledge and expectations. You must also consider what you want those main takeaways to be. I told you mine. It is that, communication is less of a soft skill, more of a technical skill. It's a little bit of both, but I would say far and more beyond what people believe, it is technical. You also want to understand what kind of appeal you're after, how you're going to organize your thoughts, how you're going to tell your narrative, bring it all together in a structured format, make it easily digestible. You don't want to leave people feeling discombobulated after speaking with you. I've had people where you talk to them and, like I said, I have ADHD too, so I can typically follow along, but there are times where the conversation gets so disparate where it's all over the place, and then you're back to where you started and you're like, how do we, nothing was answered. And another thing I do like to notate is your use of words. Your word choice says a lot about how you're feeling about something, whether you realize it or not. An easy one for people to understand is I get to versus I have to. So if you say, I have to go to my mother-in-law's this weekend, that doesn't sound really nice, does it? But if you say I get to, it makes it sound like it's more of a privilege to do the thing, like that. See what I mean? And on the topic of feedback, one thing I did through the creation of this presentation is I did show it to a lot of different people, and I asked them for their honest feedback. A lot of them said things, like, oh, this is great. Just be careful as coming off as too technical or using too much jargon. Another said, make sure everything is in order, that it has a good flow. Another suggested, make sure you don't spend too much time on any micro point because I have a tendency to rabbit hole. So something that I've been working on and trying to master more of as time marches on too is the ability to explain things in few words as possible. This presentation is not a great example of that, but um, you know, when it comes down to it, it's still a really good piece of advice. But I will be the first to tell you also, concisiveness is a valuable quality. I do try to exercise that. The ability to distill technical topics into more approachable formats is too. But, and this is key, conciseness without clarity is just confusion wrapped in brevity. To master communication, you do need a balance of both, ensuring that you're not just cutting words for the sake of cutting them down, but focusing on making sure that your message is easy to grasp without losing any substance. It's not about how much you say, but about how well your audience understands what you're saying. This may sound contradictory, but sometimes clarity requires careful elaboration. Conciseness is important, though it's equally important to know when and why you should expand on something. So, as a general rule, I do try to be concise by default and tend to get more into detail whenever there are specific junctures, usually. So, as you can see here. And thinking about communication at a very high level, there are a lot of different buckets we can place certain components into. One I do like to talk about, especially, is kind of the difference between direct and indirect communication. I mentioned earlier about neurodivergence, and a lot of people who are autistic, typically, again, not all, tend to have a more straightforward and direct communication style. This is where someone explicitly states what they mean without too much reliance on implication or context. These types of people, they're going to value clarity and efficiency. And this is also something that is very regional across the world. So, for example, places like Germany, Scandinavia, even the United States are typically more direct. However, in the United States, there are some exceptions. I mean, we're here in Oklahoma. We've heard "bless your heart." That doesn't mean that's not nice. People aren't being nice when they say that. So, um, when it comes to indirect communication, this style messages are more often implied than explicitly stated. The speaker may rely on context and nonverbal cues or a shared understanding of something to convey the meaning. This is a type of culture that will value harmony and saving face. And the more high context cultures like this, ones that are a bit more indirect, are usually places like Japan, China, and some Middle Eastern countries. And then, given what we've just discussed, there is a way to be direct without being brash. I myself, this is something that I've also kind of shaped throughout the years because when you grow up and you're autistic and you just say exactly what you see, people don't like that all the time. So often what you're going to have to do is, make sure you pare things down and make sure that you have a careful and tactful delivery. As I mentioned earlier, soft skills are mistakenly perceived as nice to have, but I think that they are essential to effective communication, collaboration, leadership, and team dynamics. One key distinction is between the incompetent jerk and the lovable star. You can see that here. The incompetent jerk may be technically proficient. This could be someone who's really good at coding and, they might have their music blasting with their headphones on and they don't look at anyone and they're just coding and they don't, they're a little gruff, maybe something like that, right? Um, their lack of emotional intelligence and empathy can undermine morale and productivity in the workplace, especially if they're like snapping at people or just every communication you have with them is like sandpaper. Speaking of which, that creates friction with the team. It can erode trust and negatively impact the work and the environment, even if their work output is high. In contrast, the lovable star, that's someone who is not only competent in their role, but also excels at building relationships, fostering trust, and collaborating with others effectively. This is a combination of technical and interpersonal skills that leads to better outcomes, higher team performance, stronger cohesion, etc. And this concept of radical candor, this is one that I really like too. As someone who kind of sits between ruinous empathy and radical candor, kind of on the more on the side of radical candor, um, I like to talk about this. What radical candor is it involves providing honest, direct feedback while demonstrating genuine care for the person receiving it. It promotes a culture of transparency and growth, where individuals do feel supported in their development while being held accountable. In contrast, manipulative insincerity is when feedback is either withheld or sugarcoated to avoid discomfort, to where things just don't get solved. And ultimately, even if you think you're being nice, that behavior can be damaging as it prevents individuals from receiving the feedback they need to improve and creates a culture of avoidance where underlying issues just go unaddressed. And if radical candor is practiced consistently, it can build stronger, more resilient teams by encouraging openness and continuous improvement. And I have a degree in fine arts, and let me tell you, radical candor would have been a breath of fresh air compared to some of the obnoxious aggressions we had to deal with whenever it came to critique. I don't know if you've ever been a part of art critique, but some people can get mean. Um,
Stacey,
and some,
I love what you said about I love what you said about the idea that it's not just a nice to have, it's a required skill. So we have a sister organization called the Institute of Internal Auditors. A lot of us on the call are auditors, or at least audit related. One of the key skills that they mention in for anything. It's not the ability to detect fraud, the ability to test, the ability to do things. It's the ability to communicate with other individuals. So just to reinforce that, and for those auditors who don't know that, that's certainly perceived by most as the most important skill that we can have.
I agree. I always argue when we bring up the trifecta of just, again, going back to one of those earlier slides, people, processes, and technology. The other do not exist without people, because all of those things are there to serve people. So that's always going to be the most important and core function, in my opinion. Thank you. And some things to consider when we are practicing things like more direct speech or radical candor, for instance. There are these concepts of intent versus impact and niceness versus kindness. And I wish I would have known the niceness versus kindness like way earlier in my career. But basically, if you mean to say something different than what you've said or how it was interpreted, the impact always outweighs your intent. Again, this is true in low context in direct cultures. How your message is received in most circumstances, given how America is especially, is on you and you alone. You can't blame someone else for completely interpreting your message if you didn't convey it properly or with enough context or details. Cases of intent versus impact are especially delicate when a person speaks to, let's say, marginalized groups and uses words that come across like microaggressions. Again, when it comes to things like that, if you say something incorrectly or feel that you were misinterpreted, own it. Take accountability, genuinely apologize, fix it, don't double down, and then move forward. Accountability and wrongness to admit that you're wrong, or sorry, accountability and willingness to admit that you're wrong goes a really long way. That's one thing that people will see if you do or say something wrong and then you apologize instead of putting up a fight. It's so much easier. I promise you. People will forgive you as long as you're sincere. Um, and for the niceness versus kindness piece, like I said, I wish I would know this way sooner. This is now another core philosophy that I operate on. Kind of going back to another point I was making, being nice might involve avoiding conversations. It might be saying, you know, you look great in that, instead of giving them a tip or something that could help them improve, or, maybe they have a big booger on their face and you don't tell them, that kind of thing. And if you want to avoid discomfort, it doesn't, again, address the problem. Allowing the issue to persist can lead to resentment. If I ask you, is there anything on my face, and you tell me no, and then I go and look in the mirror and I have like a big blotch, I'm going to be like, what? They didn't tell me the truth. But being kind, that involves addressing the issue directly with empathy. you know, it could be telling someone like, hey, maybe you don't want to hear this, but your fly's undone. You should go, go check that out. Go fix that real quick. People will always appreciate that, especially if someone's like going to go on stage or be in front of a lot of people. Like, it's not just in those situations, but those are really relatable examples. We want to make sure when we're being kind of how we can figure out how to support one another and stay on track. This approach is honest and it offers support while helping the person improve without sugarcoating, and it fosters a healthier relationship. And I like to choose being kind over nice because kindness, again, is more direct, it's more truthful, and it encourages change. Niceness to me is just empty padding, and it's typically not productive. Being nice spares feelings, being kind uplifts. Here's one of my favorite slides. I don't even eat Taco Bell, but I know the craze about the 7-layer burrito. Now we're going to talk about layers, because a lot of what I'm talking about, if you could think of it like in a concept of layers, it's really helpful, especially in a technical sense. And for the uninitiated, the best things do have layers. Comfy beds with lots of blankets, onions, ogres, as per the documentary known as Shrek, released in 2001. The earth we live on has layers. Taco Bell's 7-layer burrito has layers. And of course, the OSI model. And I'm sure you're all familiar with it. It's the open systems interconnection model, and it's a conceptual framework that standardizes the functions of a network. So a lot of us as technical professionals, or people in these types of positions, we know what the 7 layers of the OSI model are, because it's a pretty common interview question. But they never seem to ask conceptual questions or questions that can't be Googled in interviews. I wonder why that is. Anyway, I'm mostly being facetious. In my mind, we can use this pre-existing conceptual model and change some of the variables of data packets into different layers of communication from a more organic perspective. In other words, let's take all of what we've discussed and we're going to breathe new life into the OSI model. To start, we can go from the bottom and work our way up. So we can replace the physical layer with a different type of physical layer. That's going to be us using our reception and sensory input. So this is going to be us looking at someone's facial expressions, the pure sensations, emotion, and gestures, where we're experiencing communication in a raw and unfiltered form. And then two, if we go up to the data link layer, this is where our mind is encoding messages. So if we're speaking or are doing gestures, we're encoding our inner world into symbols and signals that can be shared with others. And then into the network layer, that's more like contextual routing. This is the navigation of social and cultural norms that shape the path and channel communication. Moving to the transport layer, this is where we are focusing on reliability and feedback. This is the ongoing effort to ensure clarity and understanding in your messaging, bridging the inevitable gaps in human communication. Moving to the session layer, this is how we can manage our interactions. You could think of this as the temporal flow of communication and the management thereof, ensuring coherence and structure into our interactions. And then the presentation layer, that is going to be your interpretation and format. So this is where you're making those adaptations, you're shaping your message to fit the audience and the context surrounding you. And then finally, the application layer is your purpose, intent, and delivery. That's how everything is going to be communicated with that deeper purpose. And this helps connect interactions to our broader goals. Is this making sense so far? I like to use things as variables if you cannot tell. And I thought that this was the perfect way to kind of encapsulate how communication, we like to think of computers as a way that we can express ourselves and better communicate things across, different types of technologies. So when it comes down to it, computers are very human things because they're based on the knowledge that we have. And it's different types of interpretations and ways we can make that communication happen. And so here's what real communication models look like. A little bit boring, not as fancy as a 7-layer burrito, but in my fresh off the press OSI model comparison, you can see how it does have some similarities and differences with these more tried and true historical models. And then what I'm trying to convey here is that communication isn't as simple as many tend to think it is. You look at these, you can tell that. Think about how I'm sharing the sentiment that it's this sort of footnote for a large swath of technical roles. While some of these models can show us a breakdown of process, consider that most communication isn't so perfectly linear. It's not every day you're standing in a conference room or sitting in your chair monologuing to a lot of people, right? That's just something I do on occasion. And a quote that I really liked that I saw when I was researching some of this is, "It is misleading to think of the communication process as starting somewhere and ending somewhere. It really is endless. We are really switchboard centers handling and rerouting the great endless current of information." And what's valuable to know is there are ways to dissect communication and better understand its components in a more methodical way. Again, very technically speaking. So as I've gone through this, here's a recap. All right. We know there are countless ways to communicate. It's a very technical skill. And on top of that, whenever it comes to communication, active listening and tactful language are equally important. You want to make sure that you are listening and having a real conversation instead of trying to just blast what you want to say at any given time. And being direct can make things easier for everyone. Soft skills are not a nice to have, and we should prioritize them. I'm glad to hear that in those auditing roles, that's true, because there's some that I've seen that, not auditing roles specifically, but a lot of technical roles where it's not so true, where it's just like, just do the job and that's it. And a couple of the different tips that I've shown throughout here is, you definitely want to understand your audience, be self-aware, especially when it comes to having nonverbal awareness. Engage in that active listening, try to be clear and concise and, go into detail where it's necessary. Know your audience on that too. Encourage openness and transparency, exercise empathy, and make sure that you're able to adapt to different people's communication styles. So that's what I have. So thank you again for letting me be here. This is all about being able to refine your message, choose the right medium, and remember, it's something that is ever changing. It is not just a skill; it's also an evolving art form, as I like to think of it.
That was great, Stacy. Thank you. One thing I remember from your prior presentation, you talked a little bit about written communication and how it can come off very differently than maybe your intent is. Could you
Yes.
cover a little bit about that?
Yeah,
'Cause,
actually, I
that's
can.
one thing we do a ton is just shooting out emails into the world. It's like, okay, hey, I need you to do this right now or whatever.
Yeah.
Can you kind of help us with that
Yeah.
piece of it?
Yeah, so the reason I skipped that one, as I had mentioned, was prior to I had this in PowerPoint, and then whenever I went to Google, you will all be sad to know that I used to have mouse drawings here with different situations and they didn't carry over. So when I get into direct and indirect communication, I gave some examples here of written communication and how someone wrote an email, and here's some of the examples without the flourishments of the images, but um, where bad direct communication can happen too, because if you're being direct but don't have enough information or context, or you don't handle it in a tactful way, you could come off sounding really cold. So like in this example, someone is let's say Bob, or I guess it's John. John is addressing Sarah, and in this report they see, hey, the information in this report is incorrect. Fix the errors and resubmit it by the end of the day. There's not a lot there, right? We don't know what errors need to be fixed. We don't know a lot, which reports, anything like that. So another example of bad communication, but indirect. This is someone who is trying to avoid sounding mean, but is also, again, not giving enough information. So, hi, Sarah. I was looking through the report and noticed a few things that seem off. I was wondering if you might have the time to look at the data. It could use some adjustments. If possible, could you revise and submit it when convenient? When convenient, that could be a year from now, you know? So you have to keep in mind whenever you're communicating with other people to not only have what information is needed, but to also include things of like when exactly you need it by. So you kind of see the back and forth between these two of how they're both not great, but examples of direct and indirect. But here is an example of good direct with softening where they're asking, say, hi, Sarah, I've received the report and found a few issues with the data that need to be corrected, namely in sections X, Y, and Z. Could you please make the necessary updates and resubmit by the end of the day? Much better example. So another thing that I do too that I like to recommend to people, especially if you're emailing, this is something I learned when I was working at a bank. And I'll give an example right here if it'll let me type. Let's see. Um, is here. I'll do it right here. You can still see it. Often when I write an email, I will have a sentence like, hello, thank you for sending this over. I have two questions. And then I will put one, question one, two, question two. Can you, well, yeah, can you please answer this by X? And the reason I do this is it keeps it really short. It tells them, that I have these questions, I need them answered, and I need it by this time. You can have a little bit more detail than that, but the bulleted components, those are really important. I use those a lot. I don't typically use more than 3 bullets because if you start to get more than that, people just won't read it and they won't answer your questions. I've had such a low success rate on having more than 3 bullets. I'd usually do 2 to 3. And that, in my opinion, if you have things that you do need to ask someone, usually what they'll do is they'll answer in line right underneath, or they'll do it in the email. Makes it a lot easier. So I hope that helps too
That
and covers
that's
what we wanted out of that section. So I'm sorry it didn't
No, that's perfect. Thank you,
redraw
Stacy. I
those.
appreciate that. I was just thinking about the idea that, especially as auditors, we're we're sending those kind of emails all the time. It's like, or even communicating to our team, you
Mhm.
know, when we're leading an engagement and saying, oh, hey, I need you to go fix this section. It's like, well, that's awesome. I don't have any idea what you want me to fix because I'm the one who wrote it. So it looks perfect to me. You have to tell
Yeah.
me what you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's great. Lee, I think I saw your question. Do you want me to ask that one, or do you want to come off mute?
Go for it.
All right. So Lee just mentioned a question about working with teams in separate locations or working remotely, essentially. And obviously, that's what you're doing now. So, do you have any tips for that for those of us that are more used to more face-to-face conversations, or how to better communicate across Zoom, Teams, you know, these other mechanisms?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the first things I'll say is like you definitely want to contact people within their working hours, because if they're across like, different regions, that's an important one to note. And something that I've dealt with working remote for the past however long now is if you're talking to someone on Teams or Slack, don't just send a message that says, "Hey," you know, first and foremost, an important thing to know is that if you're going to message someone and you have an inquiry, first and foremost, make sure that you're putting it in the right or in the right bucket, I guess you could say. So, for example, in my last role that I had, we had a ticketing system that we would use, but people would try to do the hey thing over Slack. And then, it's like, so you have to be like, okay, hi. And then they're like, can I ask you a question? And it's like, sure. And then there's time in between that, right? So if you're going to ask someone something, and if it's something related to, like, let's say a task that they need to do, just use the ticketing system. If you're asking them a question outside of the task or like that type of work, ask the question up front. Don't do the hey, hey, hi, hi back and forth. Like that gets really old because it happens with like, especially when you're working in a role where a lot of people are coming to you to have to like go through all of the haze before you get to what you need to get to. So those are some kind of off the top of my head recommendations on remote working is to just, when you introduce yourself, you can say, hello, enter, da 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 da. Can you, blah, 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 blah. That way it's all in one message and you don't have to wait for it.
Absolutely. No, that's great. Thank you. So again, I'll open it up for questions further. I've got a couple more if everybody's going to be shy, but does anybody have any questions? Again, chat or open up your mic, whatever you prefer, since we are talking about communication. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Shy crowd. Fine. I got another couple. So again, going back to just our role when it comes to auditors, a lot of times we have to deliver really bad news, or what the auditee perceives as really bad news. Do you have any recommendations for and I think it comes back to your kindness versus niceness thing again. um but do you have any recommendations for how to better approach complicated conversations or difficult conversations with maybe even a hostile audience?
Yeah. Let's see, with auditing, for example, because that can be tricky, right? Because it is bad news. It could be that, hey, your network is compromised. I've had to deliver that news. What I try to do whenever I, come across those situations is, again, just be direct, but focus on the empathy part and to give them the actionable advice needed. If that's part of your role too, to say, hey, look, this is a temporary state of being. The fact that we're auditing it means that we're working toward fixing the problem. So if you focus on the solution part of it and say, hey, this is something that we're working toward fixing, I think that tends to, not always, there's going to be exceptions, but tends to get people to feel a little bit better about it. It's almost like you get a diagnosis and it's really scary. And then it's like, no, wait, but there's a way, like we can mitigate, we can manage, we can do this, and we can get you from point A to point B. So as long as they see the light at the end of the tunnel, I think it makes it easier for them to sort of take in that information.
Great. Just to give you an example of what we normally do, and I don't know if this is really the right approach, but this is the way we've always done it from a standpoint of our organization. We try to stay as factual as humanly possible.
Yeah.
So we try to disconnect entirely from the emotion, which again, I'm not entirely sure that's the best approach, but come at it and, because people will come back at us very emotionally. Oh, that's a low risk item. You're thinking about that wrong. It's like, that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about this specific thing. Is it factual? Do we understand it correctly? Not that the other part all comes later. We'll talk about the impact and the risk and all that later on. Do we understand what we understand? And it sometimes shutting down those kind of conversations, especially when you're in a lead type of role, it's very difficult and very delicate because sometimes you're talking to elevated portions of leadership and
Yeah.
explain this. Is like, I appreciate your thoughts here. I understand that's not what we're trying to accomplish right now. So I don't know if that changes anything, but that's one of the things that we try to do is almost take the emotion out. Again, what do you think about that? I mean, it sounds like you're more pro empathy in those
Yeah,
situations.
I think that in that situation too, like if you're delivering the information, you can deliver it in a way that is removed. And then when you're handling their response, you can kind of like lead more into the empathetic part where it's like what you said, hey, I understand, and then you can kind of redirect the focus. And I think that's where that is invoked more than it is in the delivery, because getting them out of that panic mode, that's where you're going to be required to kind of move out of or kind of go back and forth between those states of being.
That's great. Thank you, Stacy. All right. We have just a few more minutes left. If anybody has any additional questions, if not, Stacy, can you put your LinkedIn
Yeah,
link in the chat? That way we can all find you easily. Because I will admit, I struggled deeply to find you on LinkedIn.
I did that on purpose.
Of course you did. No, I get that. I get that.
Oh, I have to,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I broke my link because here we go.
That's fair.
But when you see it, it's like, oh, the actual URL.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, perfect. All right, that got me to you. Excellent. So yeah, Stacy, thank you again so much. It
Thank
was
you.
great. I really appreciate the presentation. I'm sure I'm hopefully speaking for the rest of my team as well. So again, for everyone on the call, we do have another meeting that's coming up in August. Again, last Thursday of August. It's going to be a presentation over what TU is doing with the Cyber Institute. I can't remember the actual name, but Nathan Sweeney, who most of us know, is going to be the one presenting for us on that at our Lunch and Learn. It will be virtual as well. Stacy, if you'd like, you could always join us virtually if you feel like it. But either way, I'll be posting that on LinkedIn. So whenever the time comes in, of course, sending this out to all of our members. So Stacy, again, thank you so much. I'm sure you see in the chat the appreciation. So thank you for taking your time to chat with us, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to do that again in the future.
All right. Thank you very much. I'll see you
Thank
later.
you, Stacy. Appreciate it.